Hi. You're mute.
Maybe it's better if I mute because you don't hear me finishing my meal. My mouth noisy. Okay, I'm done with the weird noises.
Be right back.
Hey,
Hello. Ethan.
Hello.
hello.
Hi all.
Hey.
Hey folks, how's it going?
Hello.
Good.
The foundation has spoken.
So yes, I dropped in the notes there links to the August GraphQL working group. I was not there, but I kind of read through the notes for that. So I guess that's probably our most recent discussion.
Who's hosting this meeting?
Let's see, I don't know who all has accepted. We got Young. Let's see.
I'm
Looks
happy
like
to chair it if no one particularly wants to.
I think
Yes,
Alex
please.
is in the list.
So yeah, I
He
see
said-
Alex
yeah.
in the list. I don't see him here yet. But yeah, would you like to chair, Benji? So you're good at that.
Yeah, sure. I'll kick us off. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Client-Controlled Nullability Working Group for the 23rd of August. By being here, we have all agreed to the Code of Conduct, to the Specification Membership Agreement, to the Participation Guidelines, to the Contribution Guide, and all of those are linked from the agenda file, so you can have a read of those in your own time if you want to. Let's start by introducing the attendees. We'll do it in the order that is in the agenda. I'll just start though. Hi everyone, I'm Benji, and I'm adding myself to the agenda now.
Hi, my name's Young.
My name is Martin. Hello, everyone.
I'm not sure if I'm last, but I'm Benoit. Hi.
Hi, I'm Stephen.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Okay, it would be ideal to have people helping to take notes. Thank you, Stephen, for kicking us off on that. If anyone else can help take notes as well, that would be fantastic, particularly when the people that are taking notes are talking. It's always helpful to have others contributing. Fantastic. We don't seem to actually have anything on specifically on the agenda for this meeting, unless I'm missing something. So I guess this is a general discussion. Does anyone want to surface some topics that they would like to discuss?
I think there's Kelvin's suggested a agenda, but then maybe he just suggested it on Discord instead of actually making on PR. Let me look that up right now.
And while you're looking that up, one question I have is if from the August 3rd working group meeting, if there was any consensus from that. There was specifically being proposed was stripping back to just the bang, and it seemed like there was some debate about whether the question mark should be included still, but maybe without the propagation semantics. But what's not clear to me is if that question was resolved, like whether this proposal can proceed without the question mark or not.
I think part of the issue for that is we were looking for wider input, but most of the people that actually turned up to that meeting were people that attended this meeting. So I would like to maybe surface that to the working group again and hope that we'll get a larger audience next time. I think one of the key takeaways was, though we may be able to ship it with just the exclamation point and not the question mark, it's a good idea for us to have an idea of what the question mark will do to make sure that we're not going to potentially block or conflict when we introduce the exclamation point. So that we can then add the question mark later without having any issues, if you see what I mean. I think another conclusion that we had as well was actually that it interacts quite heavily with the fragment modularity work. So it would be good to talk more with that community and make sure that we're aligned on what this should do.
I was going to say I'm a bit conflicted about the idea that we should at least know what question mark would do, even if we don't implement it right away, because that has always been the thorniest issue for, I think, this proposal, and that basically means like we are going back to the stance before the last working group meeting, which was, oh, let's solve everything at this point right now.
Yeah, it's more considering what it might do, like it could be A, B, or C, and then making sure that whatever we form exclamation point into now would not block A, B, or C. Even if we don't actually figure out which of those paths we should take, we should make sure that whatever we do now isn't going to necessarily block one of those, which may turn out to be the one that we actually want. Matt, welcome to the meeting. Do you want to introduce yourself for a second?
Oh yeah, hi, I'm Matt from Meta. But I've been like bandying about with especially Jordan Eldridge on Relay about like implications of CCN.
Benji, so I guess from decision-making point of view, I think that makes sense, but I'm not sure if that's actually possible given that question. Well, so I think if we introduce the question mark, I think that will impact the meaning of exclamation mark in one way or the other. Even in that, like say, because if we do introduce the question mark, that should be the inverse of the exclamation mark. That means if we have option A, B, and C, the question mark, the exclamation mark will change whether we go with A or B or C. So we cannot, I think, in my opinion, not have a exclamation mark semantics now that will not change based on, regardless of the meaning of question mark.
Yeah,
That's
for an
not-
operation that contains both exclamation mark and question mark, we'll be able to introduce whatever behavior we want. But for any existing operations that only have the exclamation point, they need to continue to behave in the same way. So if we ship exclamation mark on its own, that is what exclamation mark means. We can't change it later. So we just need to make sure that that's not going to push us down the wrong direction when it comes to introducing the question mark. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
I should say, as I mentioned before, I think we were missing some of the key people at the last meeting where we discussed this, particularly the proponents of the question mark idea, such as Lee himself. So I'd really like to make sure that those opinions are well represented before we push forward with doing exclamation point only. Just to make sure that whatever those people feel question mark should do isn't going to be blocked by what we decide to do with exclamation point. All this punctuation is hard to keep saying.
So then would we have kind of a plan A and a plan B, so to speak, like plan A being maybe the simplest proposal with only exclamation point, but then if we do feel it's essential to include a question mark, would the semantics there though still be simplified from the current, from the latest CCN proposal? And is the question mark that we would add, would it be just kind of like the inverse of exclamation point? This thing is nullable, but we don't try to change the semantics of bubbling up. So if question mark is essential, what does that mean? Does it mean that it has to be that the proposed behavior where exclamation point propagates to the nearest question mark, or could we also have that be a simpler behavior?
I'm still in the camp that we should just use question mark and exclamation mark as the nullability changer. I don't think we should include like like a kind of separate behavior. Like I think we should just follow whatever the null on schema do and like null on schema do. instead of trying to add like a new behavior. I think, and if that blocks what Relay is trying to do because of like how we share the like fragments right now, I think that should be solved outside the CCM proposal. Like that, and it's, I know we keep going back to that discussion, but at least that's how we discussed in the last working group, and I kind of am on board with that direction.
I mean, I think that's fair, although I do think one of the reasons I think we keep circling this question is at its core, I think the server behavior of non-nullables bubble
Right.
is like that non-null propagation. Like looking back, we probably should have chosen some other behavior, because that non-null propagation, like the reason why we want to have, why it's like so attractive to have some boundary that you have exception handling or whatever, is because that non-null propagation as it exists today basically prevents a schema from using non-nulls. It makes non-nulls super dangerous. And we have found, yeah, you basically either throw out the entire response because it will poison your cache, or you or like you have to very cleverly handle like how high has this bubbling gone and what's the like expansion of this poisoning. And I like one of the things Jordan pointed out to me was it could be a client controlled nullability feels like it really shouldn't be necessary per se. Like on one level, if your schema, like if you cannot deal with a field not being null, that's a schema question. But we can't have that at the schema because of this, like, well, we don't know what the blast radius of that is going to be. Also, once you make a field and it's nullable and people are using it, it's like harder to modify it to be non-nullable. It's possible, it's not a breaking change, but it is like a little bit like schema level changes are harder. And yeah, but the like one of the lessons we're learning from Relay is actually every location where people, almost every, probably 80% plus of the locations where people are using at required are places where on the server, like the function that is the resolver, or the function that resolver is calling, actually returns a non-null value, but our server makes it null because we don't want the bubbling behavior. And so if like solving that use case of this has to be nullable on the server, but really it never will be, like clients can always expect it to be there, or I don't know, as a client, I don't know what to do if it's not there. That feels like the solution to that is very clearly not null bubbling, but is instead like the errors array is a good solution to that. And I would even argue remove that field from the response, but like keeping the problems contained to that one location. If we can do that, then we don't actually have any implications on like composability or other fragments or things like that. It's annoying because it's not the way the server behaves. It's not the spec that the server describes. But the spec that the server describes is maybe bad.
This potentially a rabbit hole, but it's probably worth discussing. Is in maybe instead of introducing an interrogatory question mark in query, would it be crazy to introduce that to the server syntax as a basically like kind of fixing the way that nullability works in GraphQL and changing the semantics so that to mean if something is marked with a question mark in the schema, this is the way for the server to express the fact that semantically this might be null, and that is expected. And yes, this is probably a distributed system. Probably anything could fail in the schema, but expressly, you should handle this in the client because this is a this is an expected state of this field. And why do the question mark instead of like changing semantics of bang? One, bang already exists, and two, probably this is the rare thing. Probably most fields in your schema are semantically non-null, and you would you'd want to put bangs everywhere except for certain places if it weren't for what Matt just described, that it's that it's dangerous to do so. Would that if that were to exist, how would that impact our client controlled nullability proposal? Would that would it even still be relevant, or would we would that impact our design?
I guess that may depend if that change you're describing is backward compatible or not.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I still haven't thought that through, but I'm just thinking, okay, what happens to an existing schema and how like existing clients that have to like live with that existing schema and CCN at least solves that problem, because it will take time for the server to adopt that behavior. And for a large enough schema, large enough clients, maybe that's like that will take like years to kind of adopt that boundary properly. Although I guess marking things from nullable to non-null is backward compatible, so I guess it's just like how the boundary behaves probably is the question. But yeah, I guess that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, technically, we could have essentially CCN via direct, if that were the state that we wanted to end up in, which I think is actually a pretty solid state, which is basically clients, you can choose how, like, where in your flow you catch these, you resolve them, you catch errors on this field, you handle them, whatever. You have the option of treating it as non-null if you look up in the errors array. Otherwise, you have to like type it as nullable anyways, and it's whatever. But if that schema level is really what we're trying to get, the state that we would ideally get to with CCN, like if that is really the behavior that is driving the need for CCN, then I'd argue you could keep your fields nullable, add a directive that basically says, server, if there's an error, don't bubble, but instead, or like you're already not bubbling, you're already establishing a null, but like, if this is ever null, I need an error in the errors array. Right. That would be relatively equivalent without changing any of the syntax. Eventually, you could like push that directive to be both, to allow it to be both on fields and on the schema, right? But like, because one of the key issues with CCN as it exists today is that we have to change the syntax, right? If we add a bang, we have to like update a bunch of tooling, like update our parsers, update how the syntax works. But if really the only use case or the vast majority use case is really I want my field on the server to be treated as non-nullable, except in the case where it has put something in the errors array, that might be solvable basically without changing the shape of the response. Like the reason why we would definitely need new syntax is because we're changing the shape of the response. But if we don't bubble up, it doesn't change the shape of the response.
I think it's also about codegen a little bit, like if a field is nullable, even if I have the information in the errors, if it's an error or if it's a real null. In my UI code, I'm writing Kotlin and my codegen is nullable, so I have to handle all these cases. My compiler cannot guess everything. So to me, this is the main thing is I don't want to deal with the null case if it's never going to happen.
Right. If it's never going to happen, though, the schema, like the ideal case is if it's never going to happen, the schema publishes that. And if it's like this question mark on the schema or whatever, like exclamation question mark, interrobang,
Okay.
then you know that like your parser knows in the response it might not be there. But when it's not there, that means that there was some error, and therefore my generated code needs to handle that. And that, like, yeah. And like that's the exact reason why Relay has that required, is this kludge.
Does that mean the default for like most of the server fields would be to have this interrobang? Like, feels like it would be a good default.
I mean, the Facebook server kind of implicitly has this, and that is, we implicitly have it because everything is nullable even when it shouldn't be. Probably most fields are nullable still. A lot of fields are nullable still, right? Like if it's not in your database or the edge isn't set, like it's not there. But do you want product developers not handling that edge case? Like, is that actually a pit of success kind of design to give them that ability to just be like, schema says it won't ever be null there, or the schema says it might be null. I don't know why the schema says this, but like I want an error if it is, because I don't want to deal with that case. I don't know.
Well, it's not like that, right? Like say if an entity has like 5 fields, and then if every single one of them can be nullable, then you basically have to the 5 different UI cases that you need to handle, which is very onerous to develop. And it's impossible for the designs to like, for everyone in that kind of product team to know and design for that use case. It's not, like at some point you need to make an assumption and be okay with that failure.
Yeah, I mean, part of the benefit of GraphQL is like you can communicate very clearly what assumptions product can make. Right. And I think that's sort of where the interrobang on the schema feels like it might come in, is like, yes, as a product developer, we should be able to build infra that allows you to assume this field is here. But if it's not, it's like not going to affect anybody else.
I think the part, I guess, I don't think I'm understanding the use case for the interrobang well at this point. But so the GraphQL kind of best practice is to mark everything as nullable, because even if it's coming from the same table right now, you may turn it into like a separate like API that will have some dependency that can fail. So you don't know, and then because changing that field from non-null to nullable is a breaking change, which is also very costly. So just marking everything as null. That's why we have everything to be null if you expect the kind of schema to scale over time. But at the current point in time, and when the product features like time horizon is like say like quarters or like a year, like it may be safe to make that assumption that hey, we're just marking it as nullable for the future, just in case that we develop this further. But for now, it's safe to use null. And there's no easy way to kind of express that understanding through GraphQL. And I think that's where the CCN comes in. And I guess I still have understood where the interbank comes in that world. So I guess I think,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the argument about point in time works if you're only using GraphQL like in a browser.
That's true. Yeah.
And at least from like my I do mobile clients, so Objective-C and Java mostly, and like we still have requests from 2-3 years ago. So you can say yes, at this point in time, the field, like if a field can ever be null, it needs to be nullable now, otherwise you're messing up a client. And to be fair, if we did not have null bubbling, the behavior for a schema that upgrades their field from null, or downgrades their field from non-nullable to nullable, would be essentially on the client, it would be essentially the same, right? The client would be like, you've got your client behavior that says, oh, this field that came in is null or is empty or whatever. Let me look in the errors array because that can never happen, right? It's almost explicitly for code gen or for type generation or for like product. And that's exactly the same behavior as like you end up in the exact same state, even if you are CCNing that, like if you have a client that uses CCN bangs exclamation mark, like if the server ever stops, like you've got a server that gives you nullable. What happens when the server just gives you a nullable? I guess the like answer to that is, well, the server, I guess there is one advantage, which is the server now, you can start getting like server logs of, hey, these were requests that people didn't expect this thing to ever be null. But that's really messy too, because now you're allowing a client shipped at one point in time to dictate what the schema that it is consuming ought to be rather than what the schema is. And that's also kind of funky.
Go ahead, Martin.
No, I had something to say, but on the topic of errors, I had one question before is, Matt, you talk about something being null and the potentiality to not have the corresponding errors in the errors array. Is that something you see a lot?
So we currently, because of the way that null bubbling works today, if there is an error.
Oh, so it's on the field and not on the parent. Okay, got it.
Yeah, so we only have two classes of errors right now. One is throw away the response, and one is the field ended up null. It shouldn't have been, but whatever, we're not going to bother with it.
Got it. Thanks. And the second comment I had was related to Benji's comment in the chat, which says, this may be useful when there are multiple clients to the same API, for an example, a fully featured web client and a quick and dirty mobile client. I think this proposal is about inverting, like the CCN proposal at a high level. It's about inverting who we optimize for. Like currently the spec is optimizing for the fully featured web client and like really encourages you to handle partial data and errors and everything. And my stance here would be that it's a bad default because it puts a lot of work on the UI developer, and I'd love this proposal to like invert that logic where you can do something quick and dirty, fast with GraphQL, and on the client decide when you want to opt in like detailed error handling. And if we just drop the question mark, feels like we are missing this opportunity to like improve the learning curve or like make GraphQL adoption a bit better. Like I don't know anything about GraphQL. Why do I have to handle? And this is I'm a maintainer of Apollo Kotlin, by the way, and this is one of the main questions we get is. Why do I get partial data? Like, why do I get partial errors and stuff like this? This is quite confusing for someone that just comes in the ecosystem. And if we could move that to, like, I don't know, 2 months, 3 months in the journey, when developers are a bit more familiar with the language, that would be a huge win, I believe, for the language itself. Well, I don't know how we do this, to be honest, but and I'm still like reading through all the CCN material and everything, but feels like the question mark is the beginning of an answer for that, because now the client can just like do the query and fail the whole query on a single error. And as time goes on, and as the developers, the client developers get more comfortable with GraphQL, they can start adding the question mark and start expecting partial data, and they know where to expect the partial data and handle that in their UI. So that would give, I don't know, like in a perfect world, a better learning curve into the language.
Although in the present CCN proposal, as far as I understand, the exclamation mark won't end up bubbling out the whole response because we don't bubble through nulls. So it'll just make,
Yes.
and it'll be, for a new developer, that might be unpredictable where it's going to, like at what level it wipes out.
Well, if I'm going, and again, I'm in a theoretical world, so we're not there yet, but in a perfect world, like the schema describes the product. So if you have semantically non-null fields and you have an error, it bubbles up to the data field and you have your whole response being nulled out. But that means that the schema now on the backend is almost non-nullable by default, which feels good for a Kotlin developer because non-null is the default and might not feel good for other communities. So all in all, my point is, I think it depends who we want to optimize for. Like both versions are good. And the question is, what should be the default? And I kind of like CCN because I feel the default is easier to handle and the complexity can be added later on. Benji says, I'd be interested in exploring what question mark would mean if there were only on a named fragment definition and not allowed on field. Oh, it could cache errors and omit the fields that were solely in the fragment.
Yeah, so essentially, if we were to add exclamation mark and just have it do the basic thing, just literally change nullability in the same way that it would be as if it were like that in the schema to start with. What we've discussed with question mark is a bunch of different options, like what should it do for the errors and what should it do for this and should it null the field out? But we also have concerns where it comes to what if you've got a field that's got a question mark in one position and doesn't have a question mark in another position, and that causes issues. Same issue with exclamation point. But like the more things we add, the higher the risk of conflicts. And also a lot of the discussion around this has been around the fragment modularity point of view. Like we want to be able to say, if this thing goes wrong, then I can't render this component. So just like throw all that away, don't care about that. But we don't want it to affect anything where it overlaps. So if we've got another fragment that requests a few of the other fields that are maybe non-nullable or whatever, but not the erroring field, that should still be able to render. And at the moment, it wouldn't because the null would bubble up and it would blank out too much stuff. So I'm wondering, maybe question mark only makes sense on a fragment, possibly only on a named fragment, possibly on an inline fragment as well. Like that's detail. And also whether it goes on the spread or the definition is another question. But I think for now, consider it only on a named fragment definition, which basically says my component either needs all this stuff or just don't bother rendering me kind of thing. And then the fields that are only in that fragment and aren't in any of the overlapping selection sets would just not come through. Maybe even like errors would be tagged in a particular way to say that you can ignore them or whatever. I'm wondering if we actually really have a use case for question mark that makes sense in a reasonably large application which doesn't involve fragments. I'm tempted to say that we probably don't want that, other than in a few, like, we can come up with examples, but I don't think that it's going to be a major use case.
If question mark logically is the make this thing nullable, I think it only, like, it would be very confusing for it to be allowed to exist on anything besides a non-nullable field. But as you pointed out in Discord yesterday, the adding an exclamation point, if we're establishing that adding an exclamation point transforms the field for the purpose of this operation to be the same as if it were non-nullable in the schema, which is that might be reasonable, then the majority of places where I would want a question mark are actually on fields that I've marked non-nullable. Which, it's weird that you like, yes, this is non-nullable, but I need to be able to handle it when it actually has a problem without it bubbling up. But like this, if we had that semantic, I actually think like we might not expect, we like basically this would have relay's compiler would start, we would be able to use client controlled nullability in the compiler to state, yeah, like somebody could add manually client controlled nullability, the exclamation mark, for a field, and the relay compiler could use that and just add a question mark, and like now both we get the errors in the errors array, and also relay doesn't have to worry about it spreading outside of this one co-located area, and can bubble up the issue at the fragment level client side. The way that our responses work today, getting error bubbling to happen at the fragment level, like we've circled around this many times, and it's very hard. But
I think that makes a lot of sense, Matt. And I think to your question, Benji, about what's the meaning of exclamation mark? If we have question mark kind of behave that way, maybe we don't use question mark for that syntax, because I think naturally you would think that, oh, like question mark is a inverse of the exclamation mark, but then if we want a question mark to have some more special behavior and then like keep the exclamation mark simple, maybe we don't use question mark here, and then maybe use like something else, or any of the symbols that we haven't explored yet, and use that, or even like a directive.
Yeah, with directives, you can give it a name, like required or optional.
Yeah, a bit of a side story, but I was thinking about the feature discovery, and I was like, I guess directives are nice in that it's discoverable by nature. Yeah, which I guess we didn't consider when we were originally coming on with the exclamation mark, but when the feature discovery is in question, that is a benefit.
again, if we are willing to not have the null bubbling behavior, then it probably makes sense to push forward with a directive. that both like server understands directive, client understands directive, where basically it's just saying, right, at required or at option, like at this point, if we get a null, like, yeah, in the response, make it null, but give me an error. And that's a much weaker. I agree. Like that is a much weaker version of CCN. And it might, and it's like it's a little less fun because we're not adding syntax, and syntax changes are always fun. But like if we had that directive, it might, even if that's not like, if we had that not as a straw man, but like as a stage 1 or stage 2, that might really showcase like, we really do need the null bubbling, and here's why. Because if we need null bubbling, then we need syntax, in my opinion, because directives are not supposed to modify shape, at least not on the like, yeah, that was Lee's argument for not using a directive.
Sorry, what do you mean by that? Because we have like skip.
Yeah, so skip and include remove the field from the response. That's not actually, in my opinion, that's not changing shape, because it kind of is. So it's not infecting beyond the like local area. It's not saying, oh, explode and now a totally different field is changed. It's only on that field, like basically, and you could model this with JSON, you could model this with like it's an undefined, right? You could actually still include the key and give undefined. So yeah, that's a good point though, that we do sort of change the shape with skip and include. There were good reasons why, but I don't know. Huh. Benji, do you want to walk us through the add skip as the mechanism?
Yeah, so I was just exploring a couple of things in the chat, what we might consider, and expanding on basically what you were saying in Discord the other day. Omitting things is an interesting alternative pattern that we could do. We could still add things to the errors array, just like you were saying earlier in this meeting. We already have a directive that does skipping of fields, right? It's the skip directive. So we've got that and include. And at the moment, skip, I think, requires the if argument, but we can make that argument nullable. That's a choice we can make. So what we could do is add an on condition to it. And at first I thought like on error true, skip on error. But then I thought, well, actually, we've got two cases here. We've got, do we want to skip it if there's an error? Do we want to skip it if it's null? Those are the two main things. So what we could do is instead make it an enum or an enum array, enum list. And then we can say skip on error, skip on null, skip on error and null, whatever. We can choose that. And you could even theoretically combine it with an if as well, like skip on error if something, but that would be confusing if the if comes before. So that we'd probably put a rule in where only one of the arguments was allowed. But yeah, it seemed like an interesting way of using the existing syntax. Kind of makes sense to existing code gen tools that they know this field may or may not be included because it's got skip next to it. But where effectively with skip currently, you would know what variable you're sending along with the request, so you'll know whether it's going to come back or not. In this case, you don't know because it's dependent on what happens on the server, but you still know it's a possibility. So it kind of leverages some of the existing logic around that. welcome, Alex.
Sorry, I know I'm late as hell. I'll check the notes to figure out what we're talking about. Don't let me interrupt.
Well, this might be a good time to segue actually to we have 4 minutes remaining. Are there any conclusions that we can take away from our discussion today?
I guess we are still in alignment that exclamation mark is the strict version where you just change the nullability from nullable to non-null.
Is there a proposal where that's not the case? Is there a proposal where the exclamation point does something else? And can we rule that proposal out? Because if we do, then yes, in everything that we considered, exclamation point only does this one thing, and therefore it should be safe for us to add as that. So at one point we were talking about exclamation point like doing kind of a throw and like blowing up the entire request rather than just this local bit. If I recall correctly, we kind of shot that down a bit. Does anyone still feel that that proposal has or could, with a bit of iteration, still have legs? General shaking of the head there for anyone watching this back on YouTube and wondering about the silence.
Sorry, I was reading the notes. I was a little distracted. What was the thing you said that exclamation point should do?
Okay, so one thing that exclamation mark can do is literally just change the nullability, right? Just the very basic, change it as if the schema said it was non-nullable, and all behaviors just inherit from that. What we're basically saying is that the only option? We've talked about before about the exclamation point like blowing up more of the request and needing like a question mark to catch it, and if there's no question mark there, then that's it, the entire request is now invalid. And I believe that we shot that down, like we found a few holes in it where it wouldn't be consistent in certain circumstances or something like that. If we have ruled that out and there is no other proposal for what exclamation point would do, the only thing that it would do is to change the nullability exactly like it would if it was done in the schema, then it's safe for us to just open that proposal to add exclamation point that does this thing and just push it through on its own. If, however, it's not the only option and there are still other options like this blow up the response, then I think that we need to continue to explore so that we can either rule that out or maybe that's the direction we need to go. Because at the moment, we kind of like, we don't really know what question mark's going to do, but we really want exclamation mark, and we're kind of sort of pushing towards adding exclamation mark. But once we've added it, that's it. It's in there. So let's not like shoot ourselves in the foot if there is actually a different way that we ultimately want this to work.
How does it use? Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, is there a world where we run multiple of these at the same time and just sort of let people pick? Does that, and then whatever is most popular and people like, we just call the rest of them?
So run them meaning like adding them in like GraphQL.js, but not in the spec yet.
Yeah. Add multiple options for the experimental feature flags. Let people pick which one they want to do, and then see what people liked and didn't like. Because right now we can't select one of the options without, getting rid of without saying we're not going to do the others.
If we're only looking at exclamation point, one of the interesting things about it is it can be entirely implemented on the client side. So we don't even need servers to implement this, right? We just need some piece of client tooling to do it. It would affect the code generator, but it would also affect like your runtime behavior. So a plugin to the client, the GraphQL client that you use, or something like that, that does one behavior or the other behavior, whatever, and find out what people use, does definitely sound like that would be a good path forward to explore this.
And in that world, the client would do the null propagation if that's what the client wanted to do. Okay.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It also reminds me of like Rust language proposals. The behavior is the thing that they tend to, it feels like when making changes to the language, the first thing is like, what is the behavior? Let's provide people the ability to do the behavior, and then if we can get a cleaner syntax for that same behavior, it's just a code mod, right? So this is almost an argument to push the CCN via directives, because directives, we don't have to worry about backwards compatibility. We can have servers that do understand a directive and have that directive also be purely implemented client side. And like, once there is coalescing that, yes, this is what it's actually supposed to mean, then it's just a straight upgrade path. If you're using that specific directive if you're using the winner directive.
So one potential issue with that is lists. It's going to be quite hard, I think, to express what we've discussed as like the square brackets, bang, bang, bang syntax in a directive. We could do it as like an array of Booleans or something like that. But unless you're just worried about just the field itself and not the list components within it, I'm a little bit concerned that directive may be too much effort for people to actually properly explore it.
Could that be an initial limitation? Is that the interior of lists, you can't, this just doesn't apply there.
Yeah, explode the number of directives so that there is, for as deep as we want to actually cover. Like, my suspicion is 98% of lists have only one level. So just have a directive for lists of non-nulls and non-null lists, and which is just the regular non-null, and then non-null list of non-null. And like, if you had all three of those, you probably cover the vast majority.
I just want to say that this thing about doing it as a directive instead was floated at the first meeting where we brought up client controlled nullability. I don't remember what we said. It was turned down for some reason.
One of the things I remember was Lee doesn't like for directives to change the shape of the response. Now, if we are in a purely experimental mode where we are trying to figure out what the proper behavior of, eventually we know that we will want syntax probably that is bang and question mark. But I feel like if we're in experimental mode, then there's no reason why user-defined directives can't modify shape. But I think Lee does not want shape modifying directives in the spec itself, which Benji even pointed out at Skip and include kind of do, because they remove the field from the response, which you could argue is a shape modification.
But with just bang though, we are pretty safe there though, right? That does not change the shape. So that could be
bang changes the shape because it nulls out the parent.
The parent is still nullable, so it doesn't change the
only if the parent's nullable.
Yeah, only if the parent's nullable. If both of them are, if it's underneath a non-nullable parent, then it doesn't change like the shape in terms of the, yeah. And I might be putting words in Lee's mouth and also might be misremembering, and the real argument may actually have been from a different thing, which might have been in the same meeting, which was not injecting fields into the response via directive. I know Lee is against that, but I don't know if there was also not like removing fields via directive.
I can read out what Lee said here. I'm in strong support of the syntax rather than directives for this. Directives pollute the query. You may end up adding a lot more directive text than field text. Exclamation point is a really natural syntax, especially in the Kotlin and Swift. I think it has to happen on the server. The Netflix relay implementations are showing that this has value. I think that's the relevant bit. And then he has the next bit is his argument for the question mark.
Okay, well, we're already 6 minutes over. This has been an interesting discussion, as always. Thank you all for participating. Does anyone want to take any action items away from this? It seems to me that it's still a fair amount of exploration is needed.
What are we planning to bring to the next GraphQL working group meeting?
So my proposal is that we effectively bring what we brought last time and just hope that the key people, for example, the people that really want to see question mark, are there this time.
Do you talk to Lee regularly? Are you able to ask him to be there?
I can try. Yep.
Okay. Cool. Sounds good.
Does anyone remember other people that were particularly in favor of the question mark? I think Matt was at the time. Obviously, Matt's here.
I'm still in favor of some resolution for that. I think Joe might have been, but at this point, Joe isn't really in this space, so he's not gonna show up. Jordan Eldridge might be like the spiritual ancestor or spiritual successor of Joe.
Okay, cool. And then I guess the other thing is, has it already been added to the next working group? And if not, who would like to add it and represent it there, champion it?
Alex, do you want to do it?
Not really. I got laid off last week, so I'm kind of dealing with that.
Sorry to
Sorry.
hear that.
I'd be glad to do it. I just need to check the dates of the next meeting to make sure that I'm available.
All right, Stephen, we'll leave that with you. And if not, then just ping in the channel and see if someone else will pick up the torch.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much, everyone. And see you all again next time.
Later.
See you.